I'm Jeff. Thank you for joining me for another gay church podcast, a podcast at Waycross Pride in Waycross, Georgia. Thanks for joining me again. Thanks for coming back. I hope you enjoyed our very first episode where we posed a lot of questions. We're currently going through a book called Queer Magic, and the author of the book uh, goes through uh, some spotlights a specific region of the world, and he because you can't truly separate the human experience from spirituality or spirituality from the human experience. uh he wants to illuminate the queer history of each cultural tradition, followed by a quick takeaway summary on how we can implement the tradition's wisdom into our everyday lives. He'll also talk about and focus on queer deities, legendary figures, mythic lore of the tradition, along with their appropriate correspondences and devotional preferences. With that in mind, we just kind of want to discourage you from immediately and arbitrarily incorporating these cultures and their deities into your personal practice or devotion just because of the curiosity that you have, or because you just hear something and you immediately like it. Uh, Eclectic spirituality and cosmopolitanism is one thing, but appropriation and lack of cultural reverence is another thing altogether. Many of the traditions and deities from around the world will call to you and speak to you on some intrinsic level, but do personal research before you jump into foreign waters. Now, I grew up Catholic, and I can tell you that if someone one day read a book on Catholicism and suddenly decided to pray that the Virgin Mary be the intercessor of manifesting their prayers, not only are they not really a Catholic, but they also really probably don't know exactly what they're doing or the significance and meaning behind why Catholics even do that. Does it mean that no one can practice Catholicism who wasn't born into it? Well, no, absolutely not. That's absurd. But it does mean that anyone interested in truly practicing Catholicism should go beyond that one book. We got to be sure that we don't just base everything on one book that we read. Do your own personal research. Talk with members of that faith community and find out the appropriate reasons why and how Catholics do what they do, or how any of these spiritual traditions do what they do. We have the internet, we have it on our phones, in our pockets. We have access to the whole world at our fingertips. And we can connect with members of faith communities from all over the place. And we can truly learn from the people who practice the things that we learn about. And the same is true for all other religions and faiths. This is a tour of all the queer options out there for our community. What resonates with you deserves your time for more in depth, independent research before jumping into that specific magic. So, the times are always a changing, and humanity is always progressing to become more socially inclusive and better than we once were. You'll notice a lot of things in religion comes from the past, and you may not agree with all those things, and some of them rightly so. In particular, antiquated practices of homosexual and heterosexual erotic partnering of adults and maybe youths, or maybe the patriarchy. Uh, Nowadays, we have a higher value and empathy for children and childhood in general. And we've almost universally stop the social acceptance of horrid practices in this day and age, quite rightly so. But to ignore these terrible practices of the past as if they never happened is not to learn from them. So, as we go through, know that what was once socially acceptable in a certain place at a certain time has to be acknowledged, but it doesn't have to be condoned or practiced today, especially if it's illegal. And it's illegal for a reason because it's a horrible thing that nobody needs to do. We're not trying to uh we're not trying to groom children. We actually This podcast is mainly for adults. We're not trying to be religious groomers. That's not our job as a pride organization. We're just talking about spiritual matters. We're not trying to convert anyone to anything special. We just want to talk about our place in history and how our tribe throughout the world has practiced its queerness and its spirituality. You might also notice we are a LGBTQIA plus uh, podcast, and so you'll notice a bit of imbalanced queer representation coming from us. We'll try our best that the historical information and research uh, that we uh, find as much info on our tribe's spiritual lesbians, gays, bisexuals, transgender individuals, and every other flavor of queerness. But for most of recorded history, almost everywhere, the lives of women were seen as unimportant, that they didn't merit to be mentioned in historical records. And because of this patriarchy through the ages, there exists less information available on women or females than there is on males. Compounding this historian's favoritism of men and modern queer researchers' focus on gay men in particular left us with a disproportionate larger amount of info on the G of the LGBTQ plus community than any other letters. And we still want to try to give representation for everyone as much as it's available, but know that we are working with history and history is a puzzle. And the puzzle, we try to put the puzzle together as clearly as we can to try to distinguish the image the best that we can. But as with all history, we can't have every piece. Some of it is because people were living it. And so they didn't think to stop and record all of the pieces, or they didn't think to write all the information down or pass all the information along. They were busy living the history of their lives. And then some of it is lost. I know that in the early 80s, we lost a lot of our history due to the AIDS pandemic. Tragically, many in our community lost their lives very early and didn't have time to pass along traditions and pass along um, aspects of our history. Lastly, for practical purposes, we may use the term LGBTQ plus to refer to an entire spectrum of queer gender and sexuality and identity. Different people spell our acronym differently. Some have different letters, some have more letters than others, and so on. And but each is limited to subtle shades of gender, sexual, and identity. And there's more that can and does exist out there. So, to keep things uniform, oftentimes we utilize the most well known acronym of us, which is LGBTQ. We add the plus to signify the seemingly infinite spectrum of queerness. In addition to saving time and saving space and, trying to keep our podcast as concise as possible, it seems the most fair, practical, an inclusive way to refer to everyone in our community. We do know that intersex and asexual and allies, and there's all kinds of other people, pansexuals, bisexuals, gays, lesbians, all the like. And queer can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. We know that there's gender fluid, non binary. Uh, there's all kinds of different people on the transgender spectrum. And so we know that our community refers to a lot of people. And so we don't use the plus lightly. We know that you exist and we know that representation matters, but we just have to condense it in some way. So, as we head out on our global expedition in search of our queer tribe, both human and divine, stay close, keep an open mind. This gay church will be your passport to worlds that you never knew existed, populated by people and spiritual beings that look a lot like you, regardless of who you are. So let's start in the Middle East. That's a good place to start. Since the earliest days, the Middle East has been the crossroads of the world where cultures, religions, and all kinds of ideas collide. The desert sands, the fertile floodplains of the region, they saw of mankind's earliest civilizations and earliest monotheism. Known to many cultures as the center of the world, it's the origin of three of the world's most widespread religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And while we're here, we may focus more on Judaism and Islam and save Christianity for when we reach Europe, because that's where it really took hold and became uh, synonymous with European culture. That's where it really kind of took hold and oftentimes became state sponsored. The Middle East and northern Africa today are strongly Islamic. I know I had a friend in the LGBTQ community who went to Morocco, and Morocco on vacation. He was um, horrified to find out that his very existence was illegal because Morocco is strongly Islamic. Since World War II, Judaism has seen a bit of a resurgence in the area with the recent creation of Israel and carved out of Palestinian lands and that whole area. Through it all, though, in this place where the topic of religion is hot and is as changing as the sands that they were built on, there exists LGBTQ plus leaders and events in every faith, in both Judaism and in Christianity and in Islam. So we have to take it back. We have to take it far back. Oftentimes people don't realize that much of Judeo-Christian and much of the magic that we even see today in pagan circles starts in the Persian area. I know that when I was studying the tarot, that it uh, goes far back beyond Egypt and actually uh, is found in Persia. But let's take it back even farther to the peoples in Mesopotamia and Egypt when they gradually stopped their nomadic ways of life as hunter gatherers and they began to settle near the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Nile rivers, where they planted agriculture. They domesticated animals and found plants and grains and stored surplus for food. Humans began to grow their own sustenance in a reliable manner, and with an abundance of food and dedicated farmers, it wasn't necessary for everyone to focus on hunting, gathering, and surviving so much. And it led to the creation of diversified talents. You found skills and careers, and people were uh, focusing on masonry and astrology and pottery, the military, bronze working, and even philosophy and religion. In Mesopotamia, a number of civilizations rose and fell, but the idea of the cosmos and the divine were quite similar to one another. Well, not exactly the same. These various empires often retold similar mythological stories within their own cultural context. Today, we would know those people as like the Sumerians, Phoenicians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians. A commonality between many of these Mesopotamian civilizations was their belief in the spirituality of third gender individuals. In Babylon, for instance, Ishtar was the goddess of fertility, love, sex, and war, and she was known to magically feminize her male priests during ritualized possession ceremonies. Some of the male priests who became vessels for the goddess were known to remain forever feminine in mind and manner, while still some others subsequently castrated themselves so as to become a physically feminized vessel to better receive Ishtar. Another example of priestly queerness comes from the Sumerian mythologies of Enki, Enki. Not sure if I pronounced that correctly, but forgive me. The god of mischief, creation, bodies of water, intelligence, and craftspeople. As legend goes, Enki created a special class of androgynous priests known as the Gala as a gift to the goddess Inanna. Their dedicated purpose was to sing soul soothing laments to the goddess, a position usually reserved for women. They were known as being gender fluid and ranged the spectrum on sexual orientation. Some were androgynous biological females, some were biological males who adopted female names, some were homosexuals, and so on. In fact, their native script in the word gala is a uh, is a combination of penis and anus, an obvious nod to the widely acknowledged gay homosexuality of the male priests. The Sumerian creation myth shows another link between Enki and non binary beings. According to the tale, in addition to men and women, the goddess of creation and mountains, Ninma, created an additional gender comprised of women who were biologically barren and individuals who had neither male nor female genitalia. Kind of sounds a lot like angels to me. Enki took a liking to this other gender and bestowed upon them the sacred positions of priestesses and servants to royalty. Also, kind of sounds like angels to me, the servants, you know. In the Akkadian version of this myth, it was Enki himself who requested that this third gender of humans be specifically created and called the Galu, also known as the Gala. As opposed to priestesses and royal servants, however, the Galu were hellish demons who uh, acted uh, who acted to the underworld. Whew, that sounds like another instance of angels, a different instance there. These third gender Galu play a small yet prominent role in the legendary descent of the goddess myth from the Sumerian poem. From a Sumerian poem, sorry. In brief, the story is about how the goddess Inanna descends into the underworld to console her older sister, queen of the underworld, who is mourning the death of her husband. And while down there, Inanna is imprisoned by her sister, and Enki sends his loyal Galu to rescue her, but they arrive too late as she has already been murdered by her bigger sister. Nevertheless, the crafty Galu see that the sister is in agony. Some versions say due to labor pains, other due to guilt from killing her sister. And so they overtly show compassion for the panicked murderess. Soothed by their sympathy, the sister promises to give them a gift of their choosing, in which the Galu select Inanna's corpse as the gift. The Galu revive Inanna, thus allowing her to escape from the underworld. So, very interesting stories. And I think we'll go into it a little bit more in a future episode. I think we'll pick back up from there. But I hope you're seeing that there is some play in the earliest times of Mesopotamia, Egypt. These early civilizations have already played around with gender, so much so that they are changing their biology, changing their physiology in order to serve or better serve, in their opinion, their gods and goddesses. Thank you for joining me for this Gay Church podcast as we together go through and look at this book, Queer Magic, and look at how our spirituality as LGBTQ plus people has been shaped throughout all of history leading up into where we are today. I'm Jeff, and join me again for more Gay Church next time as we look at all of this together.